today's session is on voice and visibility, and I think we only have one more left after this.
Yeah.
So I'm going to put the little plug in right now for the 11th of November will be the last one on leadership, and we'll talk a little bit about that afterwards as well. If you want to participate or you want to contribute something to a conversation that's ongoing between Sarah and Ruen at any point, please feel free to do so. So, on to voice and visibility. I think the first thing we want to be clear about is that voice and visibility are not one thing, because we often say voice and visibility as if it's one concept, something that's interchangeable. When we talk in advancement about voice and visibility, voice, most shortly, is that when an organization actually makes clear what it is that it stands for and what it aligns itself to, it's the values that you express, it's the issues that you align yourself with, it's often the offering of expertise and advice, it's weighing in on particular issues that may be happening within the world or within your sector. And when you issue your voice, what you're doing is making sure that people know where you stand in connection to those issues. There are very many ways in which those voices can be heard and made known, and we will talk about some of them. Visibility is more around, I suppose, what we would call branding. It's about branding, it's about how people see your organization, it's about the perception, it's about things that are maybe not quite as direct as voice, but it's something that we should all be thinking about throughout a year, throughout a program, throughout a planning strategy, about how it is that we are being perceived in the world. So, I'm going to put the first question, which is, of course, why is voice and visibility something that's important?
I think the important thing with any sort of media attention, whether it's social media or mainstream media, is that it's not an end in itself. You need to be very strategic about how you use the media, and you need to be very clear about what you want to get out of any interaction. I think the thing that most people find, the media is almost like this huge monster that they don't feel they can control, or they don't feel that they can manage. And it certainly is something that should be managed, can be managed, and it really isn't rocket science. It's just understanding how they operate, what they need, when they need it, in what format they need it, and then half the battle is won. It's a partnership, and it's about relationship building, which is why it's such a crucial part of advancement. I remember, for instance, when I worked for the Black Sash, we almost exclusively used the media in terms of our rights education and our advocacy work. They were very much a partner in that sense. And as Gillian says, it's about identifying who you are in that space. We were very much interested in food security, for instance, at one point, and took ownership of the bread price fixing crisis. And all we needed to do was, for quite a small organization, was speak out quite vocally using our sort of media skills. We had very good interviewees, people who could write very good op-eds, people who were very media friendly. And the media obviously found that sort of someone that was articulate and available, that could speak on the bread price fixing crisis, gave us a lot of airtime. So we got a lot of bang for our small organization. And eventually we were asked by the Competitions Commission to come and put forward a submission in terms of the fine that the bread producers should be given. So that shows how media attention can really open a lot of doors for you. By just being very visible and vocal on an issue, opened up a lot of advocacy space for us. To sort of make sense, the media really is the brokers of information. It's like the people who decide what we're going to talk about around the dinner table. But I think the important thing to remember is that they're in the business of selling news and information. We keep thinking, well, something we've got is worthy. People should know about this. And then we see wall-to-wall coverage of the Oscar trial or the Devani trial, and we say, but our issue is really important. And I think we need to remember that they need to sell newspapers, they need to sell advertising on airtime, so they're very much in the business. And we need to sell our story and partner with them on that level. I don't know if you've got anything.
Well, so to add to that, with getting your voice out and using your visibility in traditional media, you are susceptible to what they want to publish. Whereas when you're using online media, it's all about what you want to publish, and you have that voice immediately. And that's what's so effective about using social media and the web and your web to share your message. You can build up your community over time. So when you want to use online media, it's not as simple as saying, I'm going to open a Twitter account and I'm going to send a tweet and everyone's going to care, because they're not, obviously. But you build it up over time, and then you have this platform that is very effective and actually often gets picked up by the traditional media. So it's not a one-way street of if you use social media, that's the end point. Because increasingly it's being taken note of in traditional media spaces. And so it's when you're looking at your voice and visibility as a whole, very often we're finding that people are only looking at, we want to get in the newspapers, we want to get on the radio, we want to get on TV, and it's inaccessible, particularly if we're a small NGO. And we need to remember that those are not the only media spaces anymore. The online media spaces are very, very effective if you learn how to use them well. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on.
And the next big thing that comes after strategy is budget. And for most nonprofits, the amount of money that's available to be spent on marketing, branding, publicity, media, all of those things are usually lumped together, is usually not huge. So what are your tips, I guess, and suggestions for what is the best way to effectively spend a little money in order to get, it's the whole, how big a bang can you actually get for your buck? And the other question would be, is it possible and is it reasonable to chase free publicity? And is it available and is it useful?
I think, it's our biggest friend in the non-profit sector is those opportunities that money can't buy, the editorial space, because we have great stories, we have great content, and our stories about people. And I think if we remember that, policy, it's even in television business, we used to call it the Johnification of a story. So make your story like Johnny. So instead of releasing a health policy, you release the health policy, but you explain how it would affect an individual family in Khayelitsha or in Claremont. So it's to illustrate the impact that it has on real people. And we would always do those sort of releases in communities where the journalists could speak to real people who this policy affected, whether it was a change in education policy, because that helps the media tell the story. The policy itself is terribly dry, but if you have real people who it will affect and impact on, and they can follow them through their journey to school, then that's something that the media appeals to. So I suppose it's the art of securing free publicity or editorial space, and that just depends on you knowing how well the media operate. It's simple as you put out a press release and people must be available on their cell phones. There's no point putting out a press release and no one's available to do the interviews. If you want to get onto a channel that is a Xhosa-speaking radio station, ask one of the staff that speak that language to be the spokesperson. So you can do very simple things just to meet the media halfway in terms of providing what it is they need.
And in the online media space, we do think social media is free, but social media also operates on a business model. So on something like Facebook, you can use Facebook advertising, which is incredibly cheap and effective to promote your posts to a specific audience. So let's say, for example, this session, when we advertise it, we will boost the post on Facebook. It'll cost 35 to 40 rands, literally, and it will reach about 5,000 people. It's that simple. It helps to start off with an audience that you have built up, because if you don't have any fans on Facebook, that's not going to help you too much. But Facebook targets demographics very specifically. You can choose that your ad will be seen by everyone in Cape Town between the ages of 18 and 24 who are female and who like cars. Facebook demographics are very specific. It secures a lot of information about us. So when you advertise on Facebook, you spend very little money because you can target your ad to exactly who you want it to reach. But in terms of getting there free, I can spend that money and get exposure to 5,000 people on Facebook because we have spent 35 to 40 rands. I can also get that by putting up a picture and a quote, because as we know on Facebook, those get shared incredibly quickly, and with spending not a cent, that will reach easily 10,000 people, and it'll be a very quick thing that you put up for 2 seconds. So you achieve the publicity by learning what works in that medium. So on Facebook, visual things work really well. Catchy quotes, statistics, things that people can transfer. And you have to remember in those media spaces like Twitter, the information is flowing quickly all the time. If you want people to stop and pay attention to what you're producing, it's got to be catchy. On Twitter, you use the sensationalist headline to grab people's attention, and that will help them click and learn more about the cause. On Facebook, it's a very visual medium. You're producing in your newsfeed, you're going to see lots of pictures of people's kids and their pets and places they went on holiday. And if you're going to talk about, let's all go to a voice and visibility meeting, it's not going to sound all that exciting. So you want to actually be able to attract people in the midst of all the different things that are in their newsfeed. So try to use visuals, colors, catchy phrases, and things that will attract your audience. And ultimately, just pay attention. Look at what works for your audience, at what time of day, which day of the week, who's responding, and how that works with people. And an example of a catchy phrase on Twitter that worked was we did a campaign about water rights, which is a difficult topic to get people to understand. We turn on a tap, we get water, and what's the big deal? And we found this great statistic from the UN that said, did you know more people in the world have access to a cell phone than a toilet? And that really grabbed people's attention, and we got so much attention and so many people clicking and then wanting to read more about this, because your Twitter is really your little headline. You're not going to share that much information. You're using it to grab people's attention and get them to learn more. So those are good ways of getting a lot of attention for very little money.
Leading on from that, if we're going to use Facebook and Twitter that give you these enormous amounts of hits, as it were, but you did say in the very beginning that raising awareness is not a strategy, it's not the end, it's the path that you go. So there are ways in which we measure and evaluate what it is that we do in the media. There's things like PR value and AVE, and maybe if we could talk a little bit about what that is, how you use that, and how you measure that.
Yeah, I think emphasizing Ruen's point that it is obviously important to constantly look at whether your strategy is working. There are different ways that the media is measured, but it's primarily driven by advertisers. So they are useful to us in some respects, and in some respects, we mustn't put too much store on them. I'm sure you've all heard of AVE, which is the advertising value equivalent. So in order to work out how much that piece of publicity or that interview that you secured on Cape Talk is worth in monetary terms, they will give you an AVE value. What is the advertising value equivalent of that 30 seconds of airtime, or that 5-inch column in the newspaper, or that interview on television? If you could buy that space, what would it cost you as an advertiser? So they give you the AVE value. The AVE is worked out on the number of listeners, viewers, readers, so how many, but also on their spending power, which is why it's very tied to the advertising, and it's set by the advertising world. So it'll be what LSM group they sit in. So the SABC3, for instance, is the cash cow for the SABC, because although they have the smallest audience, they have under 1 million people watching SABC3, they have the biggest spending power, because most of the people that watch SABC3 are in the high LSMs. Does everyone know LSMs? So that's why for a non-profit it's sort of useful in some respects, because it can show us trends, amount of coverage. But if my rights education is to target the rural poor, obviously the AVE value is going to be very low, because the community newspapers or radio stations or SABC1 that primarily broadcasts to low LSM, maybe 6 million people, but low LSM is going to be worth less in monetary terms than the SABC. So you need to be careful about just using the monetary value. We tend then to, in terms of reporting to donors and other people, look at a PR value. And the PR value is just set by the Public Relations Institute of South Africa. It's 3 times the advertising value equivalent. So all it's saying is that you're 3 times more likely to watch an interview or listen to an interview than you are to listen to an advert. And you're 3 times more likely to read an article in a newspaper than you are to look at the advert next to it. A lot of private PR consultancies like Marcus Brewster and others use 13 times as the value. So they'll say it's 13 times the PR value, you're 13 times more likely. But Prisa sets it quite conservatively at 3 times. So it has, I mean, that's in terms of the mainstream media. It has limited value for us in terms of monitoring. What is often more worthwhile, and you can do that with print, but not easily with broadcast, is to listen to how many times your key message got across, how many positive adjectives in the article, because then you can start to look at the quality of the coverage. It's not just how much it was worth, it's whether it did something positive for your organization. But I think online there's far more sophisticated now ways of measuring your impact.
Well, and I think that's what's interesting about the online versus traditional media. You can have an article in the newspaper and you can estimate how many people may or may not have read it, whereas online we know exactly how many people read it. We know where they're from. We know how much time they spend reading the article, or if they just skimmed through it and moved on to the next page. The statistics we get are very, very detailed, and it's important that we use these so that we know how effective it is. When it comes to things like Facebook and Twitter, people tend to focus a lot on the numbers. I have 100 followers, I have 10,000 followers. Those numbers mean absolutely nothing if no one is engaging with your content. You can have 10,000 followers in the US, and you only tweet early in the morning in South Africa. None of them are seeing your tweets. Those numbers really don't mean anything. So on the Nonprofit Network website, one of the ebooks we have is on evaluating your online media strategy. And in that, I've got a lot of tools that you can use to look at your Twitter engagement and your Facebook engagement, which would help you understand your reach, which is the main value of your online media. It's not just how many people have liked your page, it's how many people have engaged with your page, it's how many people have responded to what you're tweeting. We're also finding that donors are getting more interested in your online media reach, because it is becoming a much bigger part of your visibility, and it's becoming a bigger part of you disseminating your message to the world. And even though social media use in South Africa is still limited compared to the rest of the world, it's still growing exponentially every year. And so setting up those seeds now, starting to grow your communities now so that they're quite engaged and mature over the years, it gives you bigger returns every single year that you do it. And it is becoming more and more important and more part of your core work, and not just this little additional, we've also got to put this on Twitter, but actually Twitter is part of your communication strategy and a very big part of it.
I just wanted, sorry, Gillian, to back up what Ruen is saying. When I started at Inyathelo, our sort of a couple of years ago only, our television and radio value, our AVE, was much higher than our online. And there's been such a dramatic shift. Last year we got about 17 million rands worth of free AVE coverage. 12 million of that was online. So it's very much affected the way that we look at what we spend, and not just spend in terms of money, but in terms of time and effort. Because certainly our online coverage is, at least 70% of our return on our investment. So that just changes, who we do, where we spend our time and energy in terms of our media and publicity and communications work.
I would really like to open the floor to questions. So this is the moment to grill the two people on the couch. I get to sit back and just mediate. I'm just going to ask one thing, please. Can we have little time? I'd like to get in as many questions as possible. Try not to heavily contextualize the question. Just ask the question, and if they don't understand, we'll ask further questions of you. So, where and who would like to start?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Nelisa. I just wanted to, if you could give us some tips around reaching people who are not online, people who mostly use mobile phones, feature phones to access news and stories. How could we spread the strategy to those people?
Ruen, if you're talking specifically about mobile phones, I mean, I don't know where we are in the sort of development curve in terms of smartphones in South Africa. But obviously, there's a majority of people don't have smartphones yet. I mean, we're looking at, how much more mobile-friendly we can make our websites and the material that we have. But I did meet a very interesting organization. It was an AIDS education and awareness organization that used the mobile very effectively. And it was a database that they gathered with everyone's cell phone numbers, and they would send SMS messages to patients to remind them about appointments, or with simple tips and hints about eating and preventing the spread of infection. So I think probably, through the SMS, which does cost something, but there are, free websites like Graphic Mail and others, sort of direct mail services that can send mass SMS to mobile phones. So all one would need to gather is those mobile phone numbers. And then you could send short SMSs to them via Graphic Mail. And for non-profits, Graphic Mail is free. You get a certain amount of credits every month freely just because you are a non-profit. So obviously that would be one. And then the community newspapers, community radio. I still think...
add to that?
Yeah, please.
Our organisation uses Mixit as a platform to communicate with young people from 13 to 25 years old. And we're all about telling, collecting, and creating stories. And so if your nonprofit has a particular message that you're wanting to get to that particular demographic, we can write it in the form of a fictionalized story and put it out there. And then there's a lot of discussion that happens, and that is a very effective way. We've partnered with organizations like the UNHCR, doing a story around refugees. We've worked with the perinatal mental health organization and got a whole lot of stuff out to young people who are pregnant and the way they feel about themselves. And obviously fictionalized stories allow people to really develop empathy with the characters, and it has a very high impact in terms of the effectiveness of the story. And we reach 50,000 people every month with a high level of engagement. They're reading there when they visit for 13 and a half minutes. So certainly you can speak to Funza if you're wanting to reach that demographic. Through Mixit, they're connecting with us through feature phones. So it really is people from very under-resourced communities who are connecting with us.
Okay, one very quick question.
Hi. I just want to go back to the beginning when you mentioned that NGOs struggle with marketing budgets and they don't really have that. What is the best way to ask a corporate to fund your marketing budget, or should we ask or shouldn't we ask? Or
I have an exact answer for you. It depends. I think that donors or corporates, and I think it's partly what Sarah and Ruen was saying, is that if you are operating in an area in which a corporate wants to become involved, if you have a youth organization of some sort, education in youth, and if you are going to a corporate for whom that is the market, for example, if you were going to, and I am really making this up, if you were going to a music store, for example, if it was something for whom the selling of music, however it is to that kind of target market, then yes, of course, there's no reason why you shouldn't ask them or how you ask them. And you can ask them in all kinds of different ways. I mean, it's about, they partner with you, they give you something in return for advertising, a space on your website, a way of talking, an opportunity to speak to young people, depending on, you will understand what it is that they're talking to. So there's no reason why you shouldn't. But again, it's always about the fact that it has to be something that is going to be win-win for both. So often I see organizations saying, but this is really important, so therefore you should sponsor it. But if it's the business of business is to get more business, and if what you are offering is not going to help them grow their business, it doesn't matter how worthy it is, they're not going to want to be part of it because they need to make money. That's why they're in business. So it's about investigating and interrogating how the best partnerships can work for you. In the same way that you go after donors, that's the same way you go after sponsors. If it's about what you do, if it's about the target market that you can reach, often our non-profits reach and have access to target markets that we really don't leverage very well. We have access to all kinds of places that marketers would love to have. We need to understand the value of that and the ethics of using that. It's not wrong, and we just have to know which is the right way to go about it. So I think that is always open to one. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.